50% of employers think that candidates ghost because of a rival job offer, but job seekers actually said they decided it's not the right opportunity. This is where like the interesting piece came in, because Indeed asked, well, what do you think is causing it? And then how do you think you can actually fix this? Employers thought that to fix what they think is the problem is the rival offer is to have more communication and transparency, when in reality, job seekers said the pay isn't high enough. Surprise!
Initiating becoming a hiring machine sequence in 3, 2, 1.
Hey everyone, it's Sam Keenley, and welcome to Becoming a Hiring Machine. This is the show dedicated to fixing recruitment by going beyond saying what needs to change and instead teaches you how to make that change. Today, we've got a great Tactical Tuesday episode ahead of us, but before we get into that, I just want to tell you a little bit about the show. Essentially, we've got shows within the show here. Some days we have interviews with industry thought leaders and others who are shaking up the space, while other days we cover things like trending topics. Stop by every Tuesday like today for a Tactical Tuesday episode where we go deep on how to do something that's going to help you drive better results in your day-to-day. Some days we open up for Q&A. Listeners can drop in questions, so send those to us at podcast@loxo.co. And occasionally you'll get a mic drop episode from Matt where he shares something that he's been thinking about within the recruitment space and wants you to know. All right, today, Tactical Tuesday, one word, pay. The one topic that is almost always the biggest factor in a candidate deciding if the conversation is even worth it, worth having, worth starting, pursuing. Yet we have historically danced around it until the very end of the hiring process. So with this one variable being so important, especially more transparent in recent years, this conversation around the topic, when to have it, where to have it, how to have it, is really starting to shift. So today, Vivien is joining us to talk about all things pay as part of the recruitment process, from the job description to screening to handling counter offers and more, especially when we really start to get into some of the fun part around the psychological aspect of it. So grab your pen and paper. I have a feeling that this is going to be one of our best yet. Vivien, welcome back.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah. Oh yeah. This is a meaty one. I know you and I have been talking about this one all week so far. So really excited to get into it with you. So yeah, I'll let you kind of just start it off, because I know this is one that surfaced in your head and you really wanted to get into.
Yeah, so it actually started with you sharing the Indeed study about ghosting with me. And one really interesting nugget of information about the ghosting aspect was that 50% of employers think that candidates ghost because of a rival job offer, but job seekers actually said they decided it's not the right opportunity. And this is where the interesting piece came in, because Indeed asked, well, what do you think is causing it? And then how do you think you can actually fix this? And so employers thought that to fix what they think is the problem is the rival offer is to have more communication and transparency, when in reality, job seekers said the pay isn't high enough. Surprise! And so they decide, based on the pay, it is not the right opportunity for them, because the reality is existing costs money. And if existing didn't cost money, most people would be doing something else instead of working. And so the first thing, whether it is spoken about, mentioned, or not, for job seekers every single time is this enough money for me to cover my cost of living? Whatever that may be. Some people may have lower ones. Some people have higher cost of living. Whatever that may be, that has to be covered first. And then on top of that, it is, what are the responsibilities? What are the perks, the benefits, all of these different things that come into play in relation to what the job is kind of asking for. And I thought that was really interesting, because ultimately I think that conversation about pay needs to happen a lot quicker. Mm-hmm. And even when I was a recruiter, there was a lot of recommendations of dancing around and maybe not saying what is the salary range that you have been given for this and all of that kind of stuff. But, and granted, this is from Indeed, so they have a very good pool of candidates and people that they can ask, but at the same time, obviously it's not going to be super, super accurate. But I really love the fact that they really show that there's some kind of discrepancy in communication and what both parties think. And so today I wanted to talk a little bit about how can we bridge that disconnection and how to best talk about it, what to pay attention to, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Oh man. Ugh, I'm already taking notes on this because there's so many different things I want to get into with it. But yeah, it's like talking about it early on. So granted, this study came from Indeed, so you know that they're looking at a lot of inbound applicant data. But from the outbound standpoint, I would almost argue that it's even more important than that because you're approaching people that aren't looking. Like they're happy, not necessarily happy. They're not always happy in what they have, right? But it's obviously it's checking the box for their cost of living and everything else. So if you really want to attract some of those people, like I know I used to get those the DMs all the time in LinkedIn. It's just like, hey, we've got an offer at Stealth Company with this, and then I'm like, cool. What's the company? What's the pay? Like those are the two things at the end of the day. Because, and honestly, I would argue the pay part is most important because it's like, well, if that's 50, 100, 5,000 less than whatever you make now. It's like, why would I do that? That doesn't make sense. So yeah, getting into it from this part is where I'm really excited to hear kind of like what you took from this study and then some of the recommendations you have around just like how do we even start to have this conversation better.
Yeah. I I mean, as a company, if you are sending out job postings and things like that, it definitely makes sense to actually include it in there because the reality is that pay does change the kind of applicants that you are attracting. And if I see the role of my dreams and it includes a salary that is absolutely life-changing, game-changing, I'm going to look at my resume twice and make sure that it's nice and polished and really fits to stand out so that I can really get that. Because one thing that hiring managers are complaining about is the quality of applicants. They get a huge, huge volume, but whether they can actually do anything with that is something completely different. Recently, I saw that Netflix posted a job and the salary range was starting at like 150,000 up to like 950,000. That's an insane range. That doesn't even make sense. So you do have to be sensible with that because here's the thing, like people are not going to want to say you're not really paying enough. Like once they've like invested that time, they want to go ahead and see it through, but then ultimately they do have to factor in the pay. And if they have applied, they went through the interviews, they are invested, they don't want to leave you hanging. And so at that point, they also don't want to like pull back and say, actually, I'm not interested because you guys are not paying enough. I didn't realize that we got to this final interview and just now you're telling me this is what the pay is. That's not going to work for me. And then both are at a disadvantage and candidates don't want to have that difficult conversation of like negotiating it when they already feel a little bit betrayed. They invested that time to just then hear it's actually not going to work out financially at all. And so instead of having that confrontational conversation of like, well, I'm not interested because the pay isn't enough. And then it's like, well, but you applied and aren't you interested in the culture? And aren't you interested in the responsibilities? Aren't you interested in the title and all that kind of stuff? It's easier to just ghost.
They don't want to take the answer. Yeah. And you're playing on the sunk cost fallacy. Like, oh, you've already gone through 7 rounds of interviews already. We've got a great culture. Like, it's okay if it's a little bit less than you used to make, right?
And I mean, businesses are seeing that with inflation and rising cost of just about anything and everything. That includes your employees and what they're dealing with when they leave your place of work. And if you can't give them a higher salary, what do you think they're doing? And this is something that does need to be considered. And so I do think there is a huge value in including salary ranges and job postings. And if you are a recruiter, have that conversation during the screening call. If somebody is asking for what the pay range is before you even get to the screening call, let them know. Like you don't want to get too far into the process where there's too much emotional investment, where they're most likely to ghost you because they don't want to have that difficult conversation. Because pay is such a difficult topic to have and people feel so like icky about it that most of the time people are just going to ghost as opposed to sitting down and having that tough conversation. So make this as easy as possible. Be proactive about it because if pay is aligned, that means it's definitely going to move forward unless something entirely different happens. And these are things that you can manage, control, and have a conversation about. But pay, that's a deal breaker. That's a non-negotiable for 99% of applicants and workers.
Yeah, it's a table stakes. I mean, the ping pong table isn't what's convincing. The beanbag chairs, the kombucha on tap, it's like, are you going to be able to help me with my cost of living? So, all right, we were talking about, you said, finding some way to incorporate it in the job description. Are you a big fan of ranges? Are you a fan of starting at? Like, how would you recommend the recruiter that, whether you want to start doing this, you're working with a hiring organization that's kind of on the fence about it, what are a couple different ways that you might want to think about how to include this in the job description?
I would include a range where it starts at and where it ends at. And you don't have to give like the lowest end and the highest end, like giving the complete range. You can narrow it down, like give a range in the middle of the range almost. And I don't like the idea of starting at, because there is a ceiling of what the company has in the budget. And for some it's 5,000, for others it's 50,000. And that's the ambiguity, because if the reality is that the range is, let's say, from 80 to 100,000, but you say starting at 80,000, not everybody is going to think, well, maybe that includes 100,000, which is what I would need to consider making a move or something like that. So give a range, and you can even say, hey, this really depends on experiences. There is a little bit of wiggle room for negotiation up and down and all that kind of stuff. There's different perks that we can include. And a big thing is also going to be benefits, because you can have a really high salary, but if the benefits suck and you have to pay a whole lot for insurance, that's going to lower your take-home pay. So have a conversation about what is your take-home pay going to be like based on what we're offering between salary, the benefits, how we're contributing. What are some of the other things that we're offering, like 401k and like YMCA memberships and all of that kind of stuff. So it's worth including a range so that at least when people are applying and kind of starting that conversation with you, they can say, you know what, I have reviewed this. This is there, but I want to have a conversation about, I am more on this side of the range. What does that look like?
And so it sounds like now we're getting to that second part where you're in the screening call. You're having this conversation with the candidate. So you're clearly very pro, let's have the conversation about pay on this first call. So tell me a little bit about, your thoughts around why are you very pro this, and then we can get into some more specifics. I know you've already started to share like how to structure this, but we can almost like walk someone through, like, if you haven't done this before, here's how you should think about structuring these calls so you can handle this topic gracefully and easily.
So on screening calls, and this wasn't always that popular, on screening calls, I used to just literally give the range and say, hey, do you fall within that range? Because in the last couple of years, depending on the state, there are some states and even countries that prohibit recruiters from asking, what are you currently making? So don't even ask that, because it really doesn't matter how much a person makes right now. They can be underpaid, they can be overpaid. It really doesn't matter. What really matters is, what are you looking for? And so you can ask them, hey, this is the salary range. Is what your target compensation is, does that fit within the range? Share a little bit more. And you really want to build trust with that by just giving them, hey, this is what it is. Are you within that? If they say no, then accept that and ask them, hey, like, what is it? Like, can you give me a general sense? Because if it's like 5,000 above, this is something where you potentially have that wiggle room to work with that, and there's some room for negotiation. If it's like 10, 20, where that's not part of that range, where that definitely is out of budget for your client or for the team, then obviously you can say, you know what, is that something that you would still be interested in moving forward with? And if they are, then really dive into, why are they willing to take a pay cut? Is this something that they realistically can do? Because on one hand, they might be super frustrated with their current situation, that they're not thinking straight of like the logistics and the reality of life. And so they're like, I just want to get out of here. And this is the first chance of me getting out of this place. And so they start having that conversation. But then when they actually sit down and do the math, then it's like, oh, actually, that pay is not enough. And then the ghosting happens. So if they're below the compensation, then definitely kind of, like if they want more than what the compensation range offers, then have that conversation of like, well, why are you still interested in this? And even if they are within that range, money cannot be the single and only motivator for them to make a change. There has to be more to it, whether that is new responsibilities or better work-life balance or hybrid work arrangement versus fully in office, or maybe they want to be back in the office full time. They don't like being remote. Whatever it is, there has to be more than just the financial incentive, because if it's just finances, then you can lose them with a counteroffer from their current employer. And because hiring has been so tough since the pandemic, that company, their current employer, is going to try at very least by giving them a counteroffer and saying, hey, can we keep you with a bonus, salary increase? What is it going to take? Give us a number. We'll figure something out. And that's a very easy way of losing them.
Yeah. And so that's the final stage, is usually after you go through. So you have it in the job description, you have it in the screening call. Usually as they go through the interview process, you shouldn't really need to touch on it if they're moving past that. And then when you finally do get to the offer stage, the counter offer, expecting a counter offer, that's obviously a very big part of it as well. Is that something that as a recruiter, you would be coaching the candidate on, like, expect a counter offer? It's hard to say, like, if it's below this, don't take it. You shouldn't do, like, obviously you're going to want them to take this role, but is there any coaching or things that you would recommend that you discuss with them as part of that, and how they think about this decision from there?
So even during the screening call, I used to ask, is there anything your employer can do to keep you? Because that's very telling. If it's, well, yeah, I just wanted like a promotion and a pay increase, that's where most likely the counteroffer is going to get you. And at that point, it might be worth kind of remembering that and continuing to source and find additional candidates just in case that one doesn't work out, because they end up wanting to just use that particular offer to leverage against what they really want from their current employer. So it really even starts at the screening call. But if they say there's nothing this hiring manager or this company can do for me at this point anymore, I am so over it, I'm ready to leave, then by the time that you get to that offer stage and you walk them through, hey, do you know if your company is going to offer you a counteroffer? Realistically speaking, is there a counteroffer that would make you think twice about formally actually giving your notice and leaving and taking this offer? Like, let's have this conversation. Like, I'm genuinely on your side. And this is why I keep preaching that trust and really having that conversation and really being a consultative recruiter that genuinely is on their side. Because when you find the right candidates that you end up placing that are genuinely happy, that are a good fit, that are going to stay long-term with your clients, that helps you as a recruiter as well. And so like it pays dividends to like invest into that upfront coaching. So a lot of times when you get these questions out of the way and find the answers during the screening call, by the time that you get to the offer, I had one that ended up texting me laughing, being like, they gave me the counter offer that we talked about. And I said, no way, and still slammed the door in their face. And kind of like being able to share that, because like, and we talked about this in a previous episode, that weird space between offer accepted and start date. You want to guide them through this. And part of that is giving notice, anticipating a counter offer and how to deal with it. So start having that conversation during the screening call. And then once they accept that offer, have that conversation with them and say, hey, like, are you anticipating that? What do you think that's going to be like? What do you think it's going to be like to actually give your notice? Like, what's your family thinking about this? These are all things that really play into it. And it really starts from the beginning by building trust. And part of that is openly talking about compensation, because if you pull out the rug from under them, all trust goes away. And if you really think about it, they don't owe you to let you know, I changed my mind, and so they ghost you.
All right, so I have a scenario, and I don't know if there is one right answer to this. Say you're hiring for a role. Let's just use a easy number. $50,000 is the salary for the role. The range that you're posting for it is called 45 to 55. You have a great candidate that comes through, and you get to the end and they're like, I got a counter offer. I know the range was 45 to 55. I don't think I can take this if it's not 60 or 65. So I feel like there's two camps that come about at this point. There's, if it's truly great talent, like what's an extra 5, 10, 20, 30, even $1,000 for someone who's truly, truly, truly a great fit for your organization, is going to be a great person. Or you have the other camp that's, especially if this is a role where there's multiple people that are in that same position, well, this makes it so it's not fair any longer. And this is where you start to get pay discrepancies between individuals. And some people could perceive that as, are you penalizing others? Some people say, well, that's part of their experience. They negotiate better. Just curious, like, how do you see that playing out? Because again, I know it kind of breaks off from this conversation here, and it's this like murky gray area that there really isn't one right answer to.
That's a tough one. I think as a recruiter, it makes sense to have a conversation at the very early stages of the search and say, hey, if I find a really great candidate and they ended up being like $5,000-$10,000 out of compensation range, do you want to see them? And if yes, can you actually accommodate that? Because that will give you a general idea of, can I even do this? Like, do I want to bother with this? Or do they genuinely have a budget that goes up to 55 and they really cannot go a penny above it? Because there are some companies that generally are strapped for cash and they still need to find someone and they can only offer so much. And even like $1 above that is going to throw them out of it and they just can't do it. And so knowing that financial situation with your client and having that conversation with them is going to be super helpful. In terms of that gray area, I don't know that I'm like a huge fan of like assigning salary ranges to particular roles, because there are people that have random experiences and they all come together and are perfect for that role. And that's a unicorn. Why would you want to put that unicorn into that range when that unicorn is something you will never find again, that is a perfect fit, that deserves to be above that range? They have a specialized skill set that you really cannot account for within that range, because those like buckets, they only account for the rule, not the exceptions. And you do have to make contingencies for the exceptions. Mm-hmm. Another part of it is, I think negotiating is a skill. And I think that spills into other areas of you as an employee, because having those conversations about pay and what it is that you're asking for, what it is that you're looking for, standing up for yourself, it indicates strong boundaries, but also being okay with having difficult conversations. And I have not had any job where I didn't have to have a confrontational or difficult conversation. And if you're not able to have that difficult conversation, there are limits to how well you can do your job, because part of being able to do your job really well is to navigate challenges really well and deal with the tough stuff and get through it. And there are some that are able to do it better and others not so much. And there are soft skills and things like that that ultimately do affect how good or not so good an employee is. And that shows with negotiation skills.
Yeah, that's a great point, thinking of it that way. And then, yeah, as a recruiter, you can even flip that and see, as they get into this conversation, are they a team player looking to find common ground, or are they a stick in the mud that is not going to be easy to work with? And this could actually be a late yellow flag, red flag that actually says, might want to rethink this one.
Yeah. And if this is a job that somebody is genuinely invested in and really interested in, they will find other ways to kind of figure out, well, how else can we do this? What about some kind of like bonus, incentives, like some kind of stake in the company? There are ways to get creative and make it happen. And it's about both parties wanting to be creative and kind of roll up their sleeves and getting creative. And that is typically a very good sign of a really good working relationship, being able to kind of get through this. Because if you can't, then what's going to happen with the more difficult stuff? Are they just going to hide and not share it? They're not going to bring it forward. All of a sudden, they're giving their notice. Like, this is where you, from the start, you want to have a relationship where you can put the tough stuff on the table and sort it out, as opposed to kind of like keep pushing it away. And I think you actually posted this on LinkedIn. We have so many resources to figure out and research salary ranges.
It's wild. It's so easy.
It's so easy. You can ask ChatGPT to give you a salary range based on its last update. Like, you don't even have to like do anything crazy. You can literally say, hey, ChatGPT, this is the role that I'm looking for. This is where I live. This is kind of what I'm bringing to the table. What's the expected salary range based on your most recent update or whatever it is? And then go into a calculator for like inflation and adjust it for that. And there you go. Like, it's really not that hard. Like, and now there's so many resources on how to negotiate effectively. There's 10-minute TED Talks. There's like full-fledged books that are like #1 sellers on like how to negotiate effectively. There are so many different resources. And so I hate to say it, but I really don't. There really is no excuse not to know how to negotiate for what you want. And I think it's time that people genuinely take responsibility for that.
I think that's a great spot to end this episode. I mean, that's inspiring. There's a lot in here, as I said. Like, I've already got my half page of notes and I was trying to keep up with you. So hopefully other people have gotten as much value out of this episode as I have. So Vivien, as always, thank you for joining on this episode. And yeah, I can't wait for all of the ones that continue from here. And also hopefully hear some stories from recruiters, from candidates about their experience with this and what they think. So as we wrap, Becoming a Hiring Machine is a production of Loxo. If you like this episode, you're not sure where to go next, we've got a link to a similar episode in the show notes, which are in the description of your favorite podcast streaming platform, as well as on our website, loxo.co/podcast. We do have full video episodes available on YouTube. So during this, when Vivien was sharing her screen showing some of the Indeed reports, you'll be able to see those from the video side. And then, yeah, as we said, if you have questions, send those to us, podcast@loxo.co. So, all right, everyone, that was yet another great Tactical Tuesday with Vivien. Until next time, bye, y'all.